Welcome. Today, we're going to be talking about empowering organizations through data reflection, action, and transformation. So my name is CG Heiser, and I'm the Senior Impact and Evaluation Officer at Developing Capacity Coaching. I have had about 15 years of experience of helping organizations, mostly higher education organizations, and more recently, much more multi-sector work. But I'm helping individuals and organizations take their data and transform it into action and stories. And so we really pride ourselves in helping people to understand information and make decisions that serve them and their mission and their organizations. So today we're going to talk about how data can be used to empower your organization by engaging in some really simple but fun activities around reflection, action, and transformation. So let's get started. A little bit about developing capacity coaching as an organization. Our core mission is to expand the capacity of leaders to do good, fostering a more compassionate, equitable, and just society. And at DCC, we really partner with leaders across sectors to overcome entrenched obstacles that face either the leadership, teams, or the organization as a whole. We have a focus on wanting to achieve outcomes that advance equity and have measurable impact. We target capacity building, real world application and strategies, as well as data informed strategies. So if you find yourself asking how or now what, we want to help you get those answers and do so while creating inclusive and resilient cultures that thrive. We have four major programming strands and service strands focused on transforming personal leadership, building team capacity, shifting your organizational culture, and leveraging data-informed decision-making. I have the distinct privilege and joy of really helping to spearhead the data-informed decision-making branch of DCC, which is why I'm here today. But one other thing to know about us is our core values are equity, love, healing, and justice. So you're going to see those principles reflected throughout the presentation. And these are really core to how we do our work at DCC. So there are a lot of challenges that leaders can face when they are trying to leverage data to make decisions. Some of these challenges include being in data overload, having a ton of data all over the place, but not being really sure what to do with it. Having a wealth of information, but it's really stuck in tables or in reports that have been shelved. A general resistance to change. Like, data is great. That's so much better than we did last year. Why would we need to do anything else with that information? There can be a lack of data fluency. And so sometimes you can present a graph to a large group of people, and everyone in that room can come to a different conclusion on one simple graphic. And so our ways of understanding and our language around data and the way we understand different numbers and graphics and statistics ranges just as much as we as humans range. And so creating that sense of common data fluency or lacking that sense of data fluency can be a real challenge. Data can also emphasize a singular perspective or uplift dominant narratives when we're not careful or mindful of how we talk about the information and how we talk about the people the information reflects. And so this can be a real key challenge. It can be easy to come up with one single story as opposed to really reflecting the diverse and nuanced perspectives that are in the data. I know in the higher education sphere and in the legal sector that we have worked in, we often see challenges with data infrastructure or really siloed data. We've got some information over here that's really helpful and information over here that's really helpful, but we can't make it talk. And there can be a disconnect between data and decisions. Over 15 years, I've seen a lot of examples of people coming to the table really well intended to talk about the data and make decisions with that data. But rather than leaning into the information about the experience of the people we're trying to serve and using that to make decisions, people will often just come with their agenda and try to advance that on top of the data or instead of where the information might be leading us. And there's ethical and privacy concerns. There's our national climate right now around data, the importance of data, truth, this element of truth, or maybe even being in a bit of a post-truth era, some might say. and then time and resources. So these are all of the different challenges. And if you have additional challenges that you face when trying to use data to make decisions or empower your organization to do something differently, please feel free to drop them in the chat. This certainly isn't an all-inclusive list, but also we started with hope. We're going to end with hope. And I didn't want to drag us too far down into the challenges while acknowledging that they're still very present and existing for us. So in our time together today, we're going to talk through a couple of key concepts: data narratives and thought leadership, translating data into action, and telling the story of the information that we collect and how we act with it, because both of those are stories worth telling. So the first thing I want to talk to you a little bit about is this idea of data mindsets. And this is something that I started to do with our partners at DCC when we were reviewing large data sets together. And data mindsets are a way that we can think about data that also give us some grounding principles to understand the information. So oftentimes I've seen people be really hesitant or even approach data with a sense of fear. And so it can help to level set with individuals of, hi, as the data person, here's how I have made meaning out of your data. Here's how I reviewed your data, and here's what I'm coming to share. And here are things that I don't do. And so I often find that just being very transparent and open about my role here is not to make a values-based judgment about the worth or the effectiveness of your organization. My role here is to say we have really phenomenal information from the people that you're trying to serve. How can we use that to help your organization advance or thrive in the ways it says it wants to? And so I often share these data mindsets ahead of time with people before we dive into their data. And I'm going to share them with you today too, in case you find that you would like to use something like this. So I often say that data holds power, not just to measure progress, but to spark transformation. When we approach data with intention, it can be used as a catalyst for healing, love, justice, and equity. We can really begin to transform cultures, and we can really begin to build teams when we leverage our information meaningfully. What we do with the data is the most important story. I'm not a big believer in good data or bad data. I believe that we can look at data and we have opportunities to celebrate, or we might have opportunities to do better. We believe that data really has this ability to celebrate and act strategically to shape diverse, equitable, and inclusive futures. And that's often what we are doing when we are collecting data or sharing impact data from our programs and services at DCC. And the results show us our strengths and allow us to scout for opportunities. So these are like ideas and mindsets that I share with individuals that I have seen people who come into a space very hesitantly or maybe very guarded because they're not sure what they're about to see and they're nervous. And I just see people start to let their walls down a little bit because this creates a common ground from which for us all to view the information. I don't often try to change people's perspectives about data. I just say, here's how I'm coming at it. I invite you to do so as well if you're comfortable as we explore your data together today. Does anybody feel free to share this in the chat? I see there's some comments. I've never heard the post-truth era. And so yeah, so I will read through those and respond as we move through the slides today. But has anybody used something like this before? Or do you have another strategy that you use when you are bringing people together around the table to talk about information and you want to like assuage any fears or maybe just level set together? Please feel free to share any strategies that you've used in the chat. I'd love to see them and hear about them. So we're going to move into the first activity that you can use with either yourself, a team, or an organization. This first activity is really designed to engage in prior to collecting data. And some questions that you might want to answer, again, with yourself or with a team before you begin your data collection process, is to think about what decisions you're trying to make as an individual, a team, or an organization. You might also want to think about what are you hoping to learn through this assessment? And the reason I bring that up is that It sounds maybe obvious to people who've done data collection for a little while, but sometimes we adhere to a tool or we participate in a national benchmarking study because it's what we've typically done, or because we have longitudinal data and we really want to build on that longitudinal data, but maybe our outcomes and what we're hoping to learn and the work that we're doing has shifted really away from what that longitudinal data tells us. And so just having that check-in of what we're hoping to learn through the assessment, and does the assessment reflect the outcomes that we're trying to achieve? Amanda, yes, we will be recording. We are recording now. We will be sharing the slides and handout afterwards. Um, we also want to talk about beforehand, what baselines or benchmarks are you trying to hit? So if we're talking to a population about a certain set of outcomes, what are we hoping to see in their answers? Having an answer to this question before you collect data really changes how you go about reviewing the data and acting on the data once you've collected it. Um, and so this is probably one of the most powerful steps that you can take in terms of building momentum before the data is even there. And it's really just to say, what are we hoping to see and what numbers are we hoping to achieve? So if we're measuring something and we're using quantitative data, we want to see 75% of people saying that they've reached this outcome. Having that number ahead of time instantly gives you something once you've collected your data to evaluate that information with. And the last thing to consider is which partners might be interested in the data that could help to transform it into action. And so I want to share an example with you from this is from my time in higher education. We were sending out campus pulse surveys, and we would do this once a week, and they would be like 3 to 5 questions that were very, very brief. And we would send out these surveys to the campus community, and we would ask questions around well-being. We would ask questions around belonging. We'd also ask questions around um, we would also ask questions around like, would you like additional information and how would you like that information? Like, would you like it via video? Would you like it via like handout or resource guide? Would you like to meet with someone one-on-one? And so it was a very action-oriented survey for the students to get a gauge on where they were, how they were adjusting to college life. Before we designed and sent that survey out, we met with a whole host of campus partners, everyone from the provosts and VPs down to student success offices, advisors, lots of people in housing and dining, and we brought them together to look at the information and look at the survey. They helped to decide what would be on the different pulse surveys. But in that, what we also did was said, okay, when students respond to this question and say that they want to meet one-on-one with someone, who's that someone? Where is this going? Let's have a strategy before we ever even launch the instrument. And so then when we got the data back, we had an automatic cohort of individuals who was ready to act with the information. Students wanted more information on campus experiences and events. Our director of student engagement and associate director of student engagement had a PDF ready to go to email those students. And so everybody really came together to tackle like what students were telling us they needed in the moment. And we had the plan for the data ready before we ever got the data, which may seem a little counterintuitive, but it was really just making sure that we could be very responsive as opposed to being reactive to information and not knowing what to do once we asked for student feedback or thoughts. One of the things that can be really, really helpful, and this is just an illustration of the idea of setting a target or a benchmark, is this data is sort of all over the place. This is an example of data from one of our partners where we were doing some racial healing and reconciliation work. And so our benchmark, if you were to look at this, you would say, okay, the yellow is the pre-data, the red is the post-data. For those of you who don't have the full range of color, the yellow presents as lighter and the red is the darker. So the lighter column in the center, the darker column that extends beyond the lighter column is the post-data. And so the lighter color data is really how people were responding before an intervention or programmatic effort, and the darker color or red color data is how people responded after the programmatic effort. And so this is really powerful information. We can see that there was growth in different areas, but it was a little bit all over the place, right? We have two indicators where we got up to 100%, but we range from 76%, 67% to 100% in our post responses. And so one of the things that picking a target can give you is a really clear sense of delineation right off the bat. Before you do anything else with the data, is really gives you a really clear sense of where did we meet our goal for our outcomes and where did we not meet our goal for our outcomes. And that can become an automatic area for action. Okay, what do we want to do differently? Or it can become an area of celebration when you're meeting multiple targets in a short intervention window. Once you have your data collected, here are three questions that I have seen really help people move through the data. Now, the first is really simple and straightforward, but it also gives you a very good idea as a facilitator of the data fluency of the group that you're working with or the individual that you're working with. And so asking what stands out to you in the data, what surprises you most. This really helps to get a read on first how people understand the information, but also what maybe caught them off guard. And this could be good, or it could be maybe a little bit of a shock that they weren't anticipating. Either way, it helps you understand what's standing out to the individuals you're working in service with. What strengths or successes does the data highlight? Who can you recognize or what could you celebrate? One of the ways I've seen data be the most powerful in transforming teams and organizations is when we set clear targets, achieve them, and take the pause to celebrate what that looks like. That pause can look however you want it to look. I often joke about cake or cookies, but like I love cake. So that is a truly like if we have a cake that's like we hit 97%, I am so thrilled. But one time I was out of the office sick and I had a small team and we were a new team. We had been cobbled together from multiple other offices. And so my job was to build us into a cohesive unit. And we were on that journey. And I was out sick one day and we hit a really big target that we had been working for. It was one of our first goals as a team together that we had been working for about 3 months. And we hit that target while I was out of the office. And a really big indicator that we were starting to develop culture for me was that the assistant director went out and bought sparkling cider and donuts for the team to share to celebrate the benchmark that we had hit together. It wasn't dependent on me being there. It was becoming a culture that we would take the time to celebrate our strengths and our successes as a group and not just kind of stay on the hamster wheel of hard work all the time. Take that moment to celebrate when we achieved what we were working towards. And so asking this question can cultivate that for yourselves, for other individuals, for teams and organizations. The last question I often ask is, where do you see opportunities for growth, or what number would you like to see change? This can be a really powerful question because it allows people to dig into like maybe what they hope to see, or if you're working from the perspective of a benchmark, but the people you're working with are not, it helps you see what they think is important or what they would have liked to see higher or different, or where they would like to invest energy moving forward. So this is really old data that I've stripped it of identifiable information, but I wanted to just give us an example to practice this activity together if you are willing to go off mute or share in the chat and engage. This data is about diversion programming. So this comes from a statewide justice system working on moving individuals towards diversion programs. And so what you're seeing at the bottom is that judges, probation officers, prosecutors, and public defenders can all refer individuals to diversion programs instead of whatever the prison or jail sentence might be for their qualifying offense. Typically, it's a different level of felony. And so we have this data, and what we're looking at here is who is making referrals. So judges, probation officers, prosecutors, or public defenders by the person in the judicial system's race. So white, Hispanic, or African American are the three different races that I included in this graph. And so what do you notice about this information if we just walk through that prior activity quickly? What stands out to you in this data, or what surprises you about the information? Yeah. So yeah, we can see that. Yep, I like that, Gary. Thank you for that. I think we can also see, and I'll share a little bit to warm us up too. We can see that public defenders are play a really important role in referring white, Hispanic, and African American individuals into diversion programs. We also see that public defenders are much more likely to refer white individuals to diversion programs, where we see probation officers and judges being more likely to refer Hispanic and African American individuals into diversion programs and route them away from the prison system. And so another thing that we can take away from this is that prosecutors are really not very likely to defer anybody or refer anybody into a diversion program. And so we walked with this information. We walked with a state diversion program, a statewide diversion program, and each of the counties. We walked them through this information. And this was one of those moments where we were really able to leverage data to advance equity because we were asking questions like, does everybody have access to diversion based on this information? Who is doing the most referrals and who are they referring? And so this gave us a lot of information to act with to bolster deferring people or referring people away from prison and into diversion programs. Any other thoughts or questions based on this data or observations based on our 3 questions from the prior reflection activity? I know it's a little hard because you don't have all the context for the data. All right. So the next activity that I want to share with you is a strategy that you can use with yourself or with your teams is the one-to-one action planning strategy. So with any data that you have, taking the time to identify 1 to 3 data points which you'd like to respond to or shift in some way. You want to keep this really small and manageable because it can become very overwhelming if you're like, I'm going to tackle these 10 data points and then I'm going to have 2 to 3 strategies for moving each data point, and now I have no idea what I've done and what it worked to move. And I don't have the capacity to assess all of this to see if it had the impact we were hoping to. So I really strongly advise just keeping it very straightforward, small, manageable, and focused. So pick 1 to 3 data points to which you want to respond. Together, if you're running a program by yourself or if you're working with a team, you want to pick 2 specific action strategies that you can take to address the challenges or to maximize impact based on the data. And you want to take the time to think through what's in your locus of control, or is there someone you can partner with for an action strategy? Who is going to be responsible for the action strategy? Are there any resources you need to get started? And resources, people often jump to like money and staff, but I also want to encourage you to think of like mindsets or knowledge that you might need to get started. And when are you hoping to complete the strategy? These are the core components of creating an action plan with your data. Once you've identified your 1 to 3 data points, your 2 specific action strategies that you can take to maximize impact or address the challenge, you then want to go ahead and create that target that we talked about earlier for each data point. So maybe you had a data point that was at 70%, you want to see that increase by 10%. You have 2 strategies and you've got a clearly identified individual or group of individuals responsible, and the information or the strategy will be completed by 9 months from now. This is a really simple template, and you will get this template in your handout after the presentation, at the end of the presentation. But this is so simple but can be really a great tool for helping people focus on translating the data from processing information and asking questions towards action orientation. One thing I'll caution, um, and I'll caution you with, and anyone who's done a good deal of like helping people try to move data into action is probably really familiar with this scenario. And if you want to do a show of hands or a little emoji on the screen, that'd be great. But how often, when we're talking about data, do we find that the most clear action step is to ask the data person for more information? Well, I'd like to see it this way. Well, I'm wondering if this question is related to another question. Is this, can we dig more deeply here? Can we disaggregate every question that we ask by these 7 demographic variables? Oftentimes we get stuck in this rut and this like analysis cycle where it's we look at data, we ask more questions, we look at data, we ask more questions, and it's just kind of a back and forth. My rule of thumb, and I've said that I say this very strongly in front of lots of audiences, is that unless it's going to change the outcome for your participant, it does not count as an action item. If it's not going to change the outcome for the people that you're trying to serve, then you're really just discussing information. And I'll be candid in saying I've had people come up to me after sessions and be like, but sometimes discussion's the win. And that's fine. That's fine. Sometimes that's just where your culture is. And that's the win. That's the celebratory thing. It's like, hey, not only do we collect the data, but we're not leaving it on a shelf. We're actually having a conversation around it. Keep doing the good work, keep moving forward, keep moving and nudging and loving people towards action. But I don't want people to get stuck in that cycle of just asking more questions because it feels like you're doing good work, but you're not changing the outcome for the people that you're trying to serve. You're not closing equity gaps. You're not solving problems or shifting organizational culture. So the last thing I want to talk to you about after the action strategy plan is this idea of how to move from numbers to narrative. And these are practices that I've tried, and now I'm bringing them to you to share with you. But I would love to hear any question or any thoughts or strategies that you have in the chat. I see all your questions and I am going to answer them. This is our last slide, and then I'll answer your questions. But moving from numbers to narrative, start with an idea or a question or a story that connects with back with the data. And so sometimes it can be telling a story about a moment that really mattered to your organization and then connecting that back to the information that was collected. You can always take the time to balance the numbers with quotes or comments or other narratives. Oftentimes we can say like we have some open-ended comments about how someone was impacted by something, and then we can see like the learning outcomes around, leadership, for example, if the comments are around leadership. So just connecting those two together. Giving numbers context either over time, across groups, in comparison to national benchmarks, or even in comparison to prior developed targets. Maybe last year your target was 60%, this year it's 75% because you grew last year. And so just giving context to the numbers that goes beyond just a percentage. Creating powerful visuals that have impact, especially the right visual, can really help and aid data fluency and help people draw the conclusions that you're hoping they will reach through the data. And then I would also, and we try to do this relatively frequently, and I did it when I was doing research, is have groups come in to review the data and share their stories and discuss how the data does or does not reflect their lived experience. This is a way of creating validity around the information that is culturally relevant, right? So if you're serving, and often in our case, we're serving Black and Brown leaders from across the country. Sometimes we're serving those in the judicial system. Sometimes we are serving mayors, sometimes we're serving educators. And so taking the data back to them and just saying, does this reflect your experience? Is there anything you particularly agree with or disagree with? But then you can also, as you engage in this process, the story of collecting the data and sharing the data is just one part of the plot. You also have the journey of collecting data, everyone you partnered with to collect that information, all of the people who gave you information and the demographic makeup of that sample, as well as, the journey of creating action items and the action strategy that's coming coming forward from the information that was shared. Telling that story and communicating that entire endeavor back to your population is an amazing opportunity to build trust. I think about the corporate environment where we do a lot of climate studies and sharing that whole story of here's who we are, here's how we view data, here's the data we collected, here were the results, let's talk about it, an action plan. Now here's the action strategies. We'll follow up at 6, 9, and 12 months. That whole story builds trust and engenders an idea that we gave you time and energy and information, and the reciprocity back us that our culture might shift in ways that benefit those of us who took the time to give you information. It can really be transformative when you take the time to tell that whole story. I'm going to stop sharing here. This is my last slide. I would love it if you would give some feedback. I'll drop the link in the chat. This is just it's like a 5 question survey. It's a presentation on assessment. I feel like I would be maybe not walking the walk if I didn't ask you some questions about the presentation and what you took away from it. But do you have any questions, comments, or thoughts as we wind down our time together? And I'm going to start reading through the chat as you all share your thoughts. So Gary, you had said post-truth era, I've never heard of this. Are we in a time following truth and the truth no longer exists? Or is this a type of statement more in an attempt to promote objective assessment of the facts? For me, this idea of a post-truth era is really just that we are starting as a culture to conflate opinion with fact, with very little backing. And people have access to way more information than they've ever had before at their fingertips. But finding information on the internet is not the same as finding credible and reliable information about people's experiences. And so sometimes there's this grappling with, well, that's not my experience. And I can respect and admire that, but we didn't ask in the information. Oftentimes I hear like a faculty member say that, but who we're talking about is the student experience. So it makes sense that that wouldn't be your experience reflected in the data. That's what I mean when I say post-truth era. Great. Often encounter folks who collect data but ultimately don't use it, and you've provided some tangible ways. Yeah, thank you so much. That's the goal, right? I think we can get into a routine of collecting data, but we need to get into a routine of using the data, and shifting it to better understand and serve the individuals that we are hoping to serve. Any other questions or comments before we wrap up today? All right. Well, the feedback form is anonymous, so please be honest. That's how I grow. That's how I learn. So thank you so much. I hope that you all have a wonderful rest of your day, and we'll talk to you soon. Take care.